the man on stage asked. Why did I wait until now? And Simon Cowell completely broke down. When he heard the answer, Simon had to stand up from the judge's desk. The lights were hot. The audience was buzzing with anticipation. Another Tuesday night taping of America's Got Talent. Another lineup of hopefuls waiting backstage, clutching their dreams, rehearsing their pitches to the judges. The contestant who walked onto the stage looked unremarkable. A man in his late 30s, maybe early 40s. Jeans. Plain button-down shirt. Graying at the temples. He carried no instrument. No props. No gimmick. Just himself. Host Terry Crews greeted him with his usual enthusiasm. Welcome to America's Got Talent. What's your name? My name is Robert Mitchell, the man said, his voice quiet, steady but carrying an undercurrent of something else. Something heavy. And where are you from, Robert? Originally from Manchester, England. But I've been living in New York for the past 15 years. Great. And what will you be doing for us tonight? Robert looked down at his hands for a moment. Then he looked up, directly at the judge's table. Directly at Simon Cowell. Before I tell you what I'm doing, Robert said, his voice catching slightly, I need to explain why I'm here. And why I waited until now. Simon, who had been leaning back in his chair with his arms crossed, his default position of skeptical evaluation, shifted forward slightly. Something in the man's tone had caught his attention. I'm here, Robert continued, his voice stronger now, because my father always told me I should audition for a talent show. He believed in me more than anyone ever has. He said I had something special, that people needed to hear my voice. The studio was quiet. Terry Crews stepped back slightly, sensing this wasn't a typical audition intro. My father's name was David Mitchell. He passed away 3 months ago. Lung cancer. He fought for 2 years. Simon's expression changed. The skepticism faded. His arms uncrossed. And the reason I waited until now, Robert said, his eyes filling with tears, is because I was afraid. Afraid I wasn't good enough. Afraid I'd disappoint him. Afraid that if I tried and failed, I'd prove him wrong about me. Simon stopped the show. No one knew what was happening. Simon's hand went up, not aggressively, but gently, signaling for Robert to pause. The gesture was so unexpected that the other judges turned to look at him. Robert, Simon said, his voice uncharacteristically soft. Did you say your father's name was David Mitchell? From Manchester? Robert's eyes widened. Yes. Do you know? I knew your father. Simon interrupted, his voice thick with emotion. Not well. But I knew him. The studio erupted into confused murmurs. The cameras zoomed in on Simon's face, catching the moment when his composure started to crack. Howie Mandel leaned forward. Heidi Klum's hand went to her mouth. Sofia Vergara looked between Simon and Robert with wide eyes. You knew him? Robert's voice was barely audible. Simon nodded slowly. 32 years ago. I was starting out in the music industry. Your father worked at a recording studio in Manchester. He was a sound engineer. I was a young A&R executive trying to sign a band, and the session was a disaster. Everything went wrong. The band was fighting. The equipment failed. I was furious. Simon paused, his jaw working as he fought to control his emotions. Your father pulled me aside after everyone left. He made me tea, I remember that detail for some reason. And he told me something I've never forgotten. He said, the best talent isn't always the loudest or the flashiest. Sometimes it's the person who's too afraid to show up. Your job is to find them. To make them brave enough to be seen. Robert was crying openly now. The audience was silent, hanging on every word. I asked him why he cared. Simon continued. Why he was giving advice to some angry kid who'd just wasted his evening on a failed session. And you know what he said? What? Robert whispered. He said, because I have a son. And I hope that when he's scared, someone will tell him it's okay to try. Even if he fails. Especially if he fails. Subscribe and leave a comment, because the most powerful part of this performance is still ahead. The memory hung in the air. Simon's eyes were glistening. His hands gripped the edge of the desk. I never saw your father again after that night, Simon said. But I've thought about what he said hundreds of times over the years. When I'm judging auditions, when I'm deciding whether to give someone a chance, I hear his voice, find the ones who are too afraid to show up. Robert wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. He never told me he met you. He never mentioned it. He probably didn't think it was important, Simon said with a sad smile. But it was. It changed how I do this job. Terry Crews, who had been standing off to the side forgotten, stepped forward carefully. Robert, what were you going to perform for us tonight? Robert took a shaky breath. A song my father loved. He used to play it on vinyl when I was a kid. It's called Make You Feel My Love. He said it was about being there for someone even when they don't believe in themselves. Simon stood up. Not the casual standing he sometimes did during performances. This was different. Deliberate. He stepped out from behind the judge's desk and walked toward the stage. The audience gasped. Howie, Heidi, and Sophia watched in shock. In all the years of AGT, this had never happened before an audition. Simon stopped at the edge of the stage, looking up at Robert. Your father was right about you, he said, his voice carrying through the silent theater. He was right that you have something special. But more importantly, he was right that you needed to be brave enough to show up. Robert's face crumpled. I'm sorry I waited so long. I'm sorry he's not here to see this. He is here, Simon said firmly. He's in the fact that you're standing on this stage. He's in the courage it took for you to walk out here and tell your story. He's in every word you're about to sing. Backstage, producers were begging him to continue, but he didn't. The control room was in chaos. Producers were shouting into headsets. What's happening? Is Simon going on stage? Do we have a protocol for this? Director Simon Lithgow stared at the monitors, then slowly shook his head. No protocol. Just let it happen. On stage, Simon climbed the 3 steps up to the platform where Robert stood. He walked across the polished floor until he was standing directly in front of the contestant. Face to face. I'm going to tell you something, Simon said, quiet enough that the microphones barely caught it, intimate enough that it felt like a private conversation despite the cameras and the audience and the millions who would eventually watch. Your father gave me a gift 32 years ago. He gave me a way of seeing people, really seeing them, that made me better at what I do. I've built my entire career on being honest, on saying hard truths, on not sugarcoating failure. He paused, his voice breaking slightly. But your father taught me that honesty isn't just about pointing out flaws. It's about seeing potential in people who can't see it in themselves. It's about making them brave. Simon reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded handkerchief. He handed it to Robert, who took it with trembling hands. Sing your father's song, Simon said. And when you're done, I'm going to do something I rarely do. I'm going to tell you that you're already successful. Because you showed up. You honored him by being brave enough to stand here. Robert wiped his eyes with the handkerchief. What if I'm terrible? Simon smiled, a real smile, not the sardonic smirk he usually wore. Then you'll be terrible in front of millions of people while honoring your father's memory. That's still more courageous than most people manage in their entire lives. He turned and walked back to the judge's desk, leaving Robert standing alone in the spotlight. The theater was absolutely silent. Robert closed his eyes. The backing track started, slow piano, building strings. And then he began to sing. His voice was good. Not exceptional. Not the kind of voice that would make Simon hit the golden buzzer based on talent alone. But it was honest. Raw. Every note carried the weight of grief and love and 38 years of being David Mitchell's son. But what happened next no one in the theater, or watching at home, could ever forget. Halfway through the song, Robert's voice cracked. He stopped singing. Just stopped, his eyes squeezed shut, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. The backing track continued for 2 more bars before the sound engineer cut it. Silence. Robert stood there, shaking, unable to continue. The audience held their breath. Howie and Heidi looked at each other, unsure what to do. Sophia had tears streaming down her face. And Simon Cowell, who had built his reputation on cutting off bad performances, who was famous for his brutal honesty, who rarely showed emotion, stood up again. He walked to the golden buzzer. His hand hovered over it for just a moment. Then he slammed it down. Golden confetti exploded across the stage. The audience erupted, not in celebration but in cathartic release. Everyone in that theater was crying. Terry Crews was crying. The cameramen were crying. The entire production crew, watching from the wings, was openly sobbing. Robert fell to his knees as the confetti rained down. Simon walked back onto the stage, through the golden paper falling like snow, and knelt beside him. The microphones caught what he said. "Your father would be so proud of you. Not because you sang perfectly, but because you showed up scared and did it anyway. That's what he asked me to look for 32 years ago. And I just found it." Robert collapsed into Simon's arms. The tough judge, the man known for his harsh critiques and cool demeanor, held this grieving son while they both cried on national television. The other judges came onto the stage. Then Terry Crews. They surrounded Robert in a circle of support, this man who had been too afraid for so long and finally found the courage. Share and subscribe, so this story will never be forgotten. After the show, Simon did something he'd never done before. He asked the production team for Robert's contact information. Over the next 6 months, he mentored Robert, not to make him a professional singer, but to help him process his grief and find his voice in other ways. Robert started a foundation in his father's name, the David Mitchell Courage Initiative. It helps people pursue dreams they've been too afraid to chase. Simon sits on the board. Every year on the anniversary of David's death, they hold an open audition where the only requirement is that you're scared. Simon Cowell never forgot David Mitchell's advice from that recording studio in Manchester. But after meeting Robert, he understood it differently. It wasn't just about finding hidden talent. It was about recognizing that sometimes the bravest performance is just showing up. The handkerchief Simon gave Robert that night? Robert had it framed. It hangs in the foundation's office with a plaque. Make them brave enough to be seen. But the story didn't end there. 3 years after that audition, Simon received a package at his office. Inside was a vinyl record, old, worn at the edges, the kind that had been played thousands of times. A note was attached in handwriting Simon didn't recognize. "Mr. Cowell, my name is Margaret Mitchell. I'm Robert's mother and David's widow. I found this record while sorting through David's things. It's the copy of Make You Feel My Love he played for Robert when he was a child. The same one he was playing the night he told me about meeting you in that Manchester studio in 1991. He said he met a young man who was going to change television someday. He said he could see it in your eyes, the hunger to find real talent, real people. He came home that night and played this record for hours. He told me he'd given you advice he hoped you'd remember. I wanted you to have this. You gave my son the courage to honor his father. This record is how David honored you, by believing in you before the world knew your name." Simon had the record professionally preserved. It sits in a custom glass case in his home office. On difficult days, when he's tired of the industry politics and the manufactured drama and the pressure to find the next viral moment, he looks at that record and remembers David Mitchell making tea in a Manchester recording studio. He remembers the advice. Find the ones too afraid to show up. And he remembers Robert, standing on that AGT stage, terrified and brave and honoring his father by finally being seen. Simon has given out dozens of golden buzzers over the years. But he's only given out one handkerchief. And Robert Mitchell still carries it with him, a reminder that sometimes the greatest performance is simply having the courage to begin. David Mitchell never became famous. He spent his life in recording studios, helping other people's music sound better, supporting other people's dreams. But his legacy lives on every time Simon sees potential in someone who doesn't see it in themselves. Every time someone too afraid finally shows up.